Did you ever wonder about bread and wine? Where did this all come from? Where did it all start from? I know it goes back to Jesus, but does it go back further? I don't think most Christians know the half of it, literally. Hi, before I get started with this week's video, I just want to quickly say that my new book is out. It's called What Christians Need to Understand. It's available in Amazon. Just type in the Pews with Mike, and here's what it'll look like. But thank you. Now I'll shut up and start talking. Okay, this isn't a complicated story, but it does go back pretty much to Genesis, where we first see bread and wine. And this is when Abram, who that was before his name was changed to Abraham, this is when Abram ran into a character called Melchizedek. And we're going to talk about Melchizedek in a few minutes. But this occurred approximately 2,000 years, actually more like 2,100 years before the Messiah. But it was a key indicator of the Messiah. And it taught the Jews a lesson that they carry on to till today. It's that powerful of a thing. You know, we think that as Christians, only we deal with bread and wine. No, the Jews do too. And I'm going to tell that story. Okay, who was Melchizedek? Melchizedek was a high priest. He was the highest of all high priests. And there was only one Melchizedek. And it was said that Melchizedek, when Melchizedek is born, when a priest in the order of Melchizedek is born, he's born with scripture preloaded in his brain. So he can quote scripture right off the bat as a small child. And if we notice, Jesus had these same traits too, because we saw when they forgot him in the temple in Jerusalem and Mary and Joseph traveled back. They realized he wasn't there. He came back and Jesus was in the temple, and the rabbis were astonished at what he knew about scripture, and there's no way he could have known that. But a priest in the order of Melchizedek, we got to go back to Melchizedek himself. Here's what he was. He was a high priest, and when Abraham ran into him after saving his nephew Lot, who was carried away from a battle that took over Gomorrah, which he was taken away. When he came back, he met this priest, Melchizedek, and Melchizedek blessed Abraham, which is an interesting story in itself. He blessed Abraham, and he said these words to Abraham. He said, my Hebrew's bad, so don't hurt me on this. Baruch atah Yahovah Eloheinu melech ha'olam hamotzi lechem min haaretz, which means, blessed be Yahovah, God, creator of the universe, which brings forth bread from the earth. Then he goes on to say about the wine. He says, Baruch atah Yahovah Eloheinu melech ha'olam bre pri hagafim, which means, blessed be Yahovah, King of the universe, which brings forth wine from the earth. This was a very important statement because this hit Abraham very hard. And to this day, from that time on, Abraham, when they had their Friday Sabbath meal, they repeat these sayings, only they don't use Yahovah, because the Jews don't say the name Yahovah, God's holy name. They don't say it. They substitute a word called Adonai, which is kind of like L-O-R-D in big letters that we use today. You know, because our books, we don't use Yahovah. We should. When I read my Bible, I replace, when I see L-O-R-D in big capital letters, I say Yahovah when I read. Back to Abraham. So when Abraham heard this, the Jews had said this again and again and again. You know, every Sabbath meal, they would say this as this Abrahamic blessing that came from Melchizedek. They would repeat this every day, and they still do that to this day, as I was saying. So now, why is that important? Because if you can imagine saying these prayers, and then you fast forward 2,000 years from then to Jesus with the disciples at the Last Supper, and they're expecting him to say this, but he says something different that we all know. He said, when you eat this bread, do this in memory of me. And then afterwards, he took the wine and he said, when you drink this wine, do this in remembrance of me. The disciples probably fell on the floor if they weren't there already, because they probably just said, wait a minute. We've been saying this and it's about you. So that's the key. We carry it forward from there, but we as Christians, we forget the 2,000 years that the Jews had been saying this blessing beforehand. That carries to today. It puts a big emphasis on it. And I want to read Hebrews, because Hebrews talks a lot about Melchizedek, and later the Jews thought Melchizedek, today the Jews still say Melchizedek was Shem, who was Noah's son, Shem, and he was the one who, pretty much was the father of all the Hebrew people and the Jewish people and all that. So he's very important to us because he's a link that we have to them, another link. But let me read Hebrews. I'm going to read Hebrews here. And being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him, called of God on the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. This is a link right here in Hebrews where Paul's tying us, tying Jesus to Melchizedek and saying that he is the new and final Melchizedek. He'll reign from here on out, and he'll assume that role again when he comes back. And just to tie up Abraham, John talks about Abraham too, and I'm going to read that for you too. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it, and he was glad. There you go. We tied, John ties Jesus to Abraham and Melchizedek. It's a chain, because he's saying that what John's saying right here is very important. He's saying that when Melchizedek gave him the wine and the bread, he saw Jesus's day right there. So that's a key important thing that most Christians just don't understand. We have to keep an eye on the Jews. I say this again and again and again. We have to keep an eye on the Jews, because a lot of the stuff that they rehearsed in the temple, coming up before Jesus, a lot of the things that they did was in anticipation of Jesus. They were rehearsals. It was almost like a rehearsal dinner for a wedding, which is a good analogy, because we're going to marry Jesus at the end of this. So we go through these rehearsals, and the Jews went through these rehearsals, which, a lot of them David put into practice going into the temple, which, the Jews were now ready, like things like Passover and those sort of things that I've talked about in the past. But I think we've gotten enough out of this that we can at least understand that Melchizedek played an important role, and he will continue to play an important role because of the fact that Jesus takes on the role of Melchizedek.